How are Georgian landslides connected with the trees in Racha? Should we be even bothered by this topic as tourists going to the countries of the Caucasus? So today, in today's episode of the Caucasus podcast, we are going to focus on Georgian forests and why maybe sometimes those Georgian mountain slopes will look totally different. Welcome to the Caucasus podcast, where we talk about literature, culture, history, and more. The Caucasus podcast is brought to you by Язык Caucasus, Languages of the Caucasus. Let's get started with today's episode. Georgia is one of 34 countries in the world with the highest level of biodiversity and one of the highest level of endemism. So the type of nature which you cannot find anywhere else in the world. So in Georgia you will even find trees typical for this region from the ancient times. And all that results in our admiration of Georgian nature and landscapes and all the forests and mountains and rivers and glaciers are the places where we take photos of them most often really and remember those places as well during our holidays. And we talk about this with our friends when we tell them you have to go to Georgia, it is so beautiful there. But Georgian forests, however, have a slight problem with us, humans. And exactly about this relation I want to talk with you today more in today's episode of the Caucasus podcast. So one of the factors impacting the whole region's ecosystem, this is deforestation. And of course the Caucasus is not the only place when it happens really, but we focus here on the Caucasus, on this region, so that is why today we'll cover deforestation in Georgia. So the first question for today, how the deforestation in Georgia impacts in general the ecosystem as such? How it happens. So the deforestation in Georgia firstly leads to many changes in the forest structure, the degradation of the forest as such, and then it leads to decrease of biodiversity levels in the region. Sometimes you plant new trees in those places, the place of the former ones, of course the one you cut down, but often they grow either much faster, and it is an issue sometimes as they are foreign to this particular region and maybe also aggressive species as well. As a result, it changes the forests and what forest can give to animals living in it and the inhabitants living next to it. So once the flora and fauna changes, the climate changes as well. So I promised you in today's episode 9 questions. So let's go to the next one. So maybe something you're wondering as well. So this is how did Georgian forest situation look like in 20th century? Because of course this is not something that happens. The process has not started yesterday, of course. 20th century brought many events to Georgian forests. During the World Wars, forests were, for example, burned down by the invaders as a part of, let's say, military strategy. In the early decades of USSR, so between 30s and 50s of the last decade, the massive and extensive deforestation took place. And it was conducted because timber was heavily used simply in the numerous branches of the industry. So back then, they were not really focusing that much on the nature's preservation. So the second half of 20th century, so between 50s and 90s, but still we talk about the Soviet times, it already brought us some programs of the preservation of the nature and forests and some kind of reclamation programs as well. So to do something with the areas where simply were the places of extensive timber gathering. However, also in that period, Georgian forests were massively exploited. Among others, it was on the areas of collective farms, so-called kolkhoz, and achieving them, the kolkhozes, achieving various economic plans of the Republic in the Soviet times. Turbulent 90s of the 20th century in Georgia additionally brought Georgian forest the period of really increased often, unfortunately, illegal deforestation and not fully controlled usage of timber, for example, for heating purposes. And no, we do not talk here about cubic meters and the number of cubic meters which ordinary Georgian could just put on their Zhiguli car and take it to their family for making the house warm. No, but we will come back to the statistics about cubic meters and how big numbers we talk. So in the end of 90s as well, it started to appear in Georgia some financial support programs, for example, financed from World Bank and UN, which of course aimed at Georgian forest preservation or extensive deforestation counteractions. Nevertheless, as it often happens with forest and nature, it may take several decades, if not centuries, to restore simply what was degraded. And that's even not always possible, as we are talking about endemic species not present anywhere else in the world. So sometimes it's really simply we cannot do it, it's impossible. So for these of you who are interested in tree species as well, I just want to add that in the contemporary Georgia, most often you may find beech, Georgian oak, hornbeam, chestnuts, ash and maple trees. And as far as conifers are concerned, there are many firs and oriental spruces. So if you want to know more as well in general about the topic of forests and to go deeper, wider within the topic, all of the resources we have used for this particular episode are in our article on our website, because always what we publish here as well as a podcast, you can find on our website on językiem.pl, and the link for that you will find in the description of this particular episode. So there you will not only find the written version of it, so if you prefer to read and not to hear me speaking, and as well you will find additional resources, additional articles about the forest in general and the deforestation. So just a glance, for those of you who have the biologist in them, this is the additional information about the species as well. Okay, so let's come back to our question. So how many forest hectares disappeared in Georgia? Because I promised you some statistic. So let's go to those promised statistics. According to Global Forest Watch, between 2001 and 2022, over 11,000 of Georgian forests disappeared, from which in the last 7 years it has decreased by over 2,000 hectares. This may sound a little bit abstract for you probably, so let's imagine a football field, and if you are from United States, imagine soccer field in that case. So, and now imagine 3,100 of those fields, and this is the area which disappeared in the last 7 years in Georgia. So it may sound small or big, or you have no idea what does it mean, it depending where are you from and what is the landscape in your country, for example, but we'll come back to the wider perspective of it as well. So in those data, just to mention, we are talking about whole Georgia, so we are including Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And if you go deeper and closer, you will look at those data, you will see that during last 2 decades, the highest decrease happens in just 3 regions. So this is Samtskhet, Avakheti, Kakheti, and Samegrelos Vaneti. And if you count those regions versus all the other regions, you will see that deforestation in those regions is responsible for over 50% of the deforestation of the whole Georgia. So here one calculates the numbers, no matter the cause. So no matter what happened, why the forest disappeared, so including the direct cutting down of the trees for timber, as well as fires or maybe forest burning on purposes, because things like that happen as well. Forest can be as well degraded, unfortunately, due to illnesses, and very often it happens directly or indirectly due to human activity. And here, unfortunately, I would like to give you that, but unfortunately, here are not that many statistics available, I would say, similar to the deforestation, being in Georgia a little bit still in the grey zone it has been for some years. And here as well, we do not have yet the sufficient funds to conduct vast research. I'm very happy to say that it changes. I observed really for the last minimum 5 years or even a decade already. Step by step it changes, also thanks to many different programs that the data is gathered. And you know how it happens, that if you collect the data, then you can really go deeper into the problem and then try to fix it. Otherwise you are not sure what's happening, what's going on, etc. That is why this part of the statistics is quite vital, I would say, to the whole situation of Georgian deforestation. And additionally to that, I have promised you that we will go with those hectares I mentioned within the wider context of Georgia. You remember those soccer fields and football fields I mentioned. So where are the forests in Georgia in general? So now let's look on the Georgian forest in the wider context, in the context of the landforms in Georgia. So one estimates that 98% of Georgian forests grow on the mountain slopes. So if you think about Georgian landscapes, you will see and you can imagine that there are not many wide valleys and areas that without any mountains. And there are two factors connected with that and something that influences the situation of the forest and the statistics I just mentioned. So firstly, only a part of mountain can be covered with forest because simply from some altitude trees simply do not grow and cannot grow. Therefore, it is not like the whole Georgia and all the mountains can be covered with forests. Secondly, a tree, as many other plants as well to some extent, bind the soils and help soils to stick to something like a mountain. So the lesser the trees and other plants as a result, smaller the chances are the soil will be simply sticking and will stick to the mountain rock. And the weaker it sticks, the smaller the chances are the plants will grow there. Yeah, additionally, the weaker it sticks, as well, the greater chances are that if we have the mountain, then it will just slide, the soil will just slide in the moment of the heavy rain. So that is why you may observe flash floods, mud floods and landslides, for example, in some mountainous resorts, as we saw that in 2023 and other similar situations to that. The mountain resorts, for example, where tourists spend their holidays. Yeah. So the gravity is unfortunately or fortunately relentless on our planet. So if something slides, it's quite hard for the soil to come up to the mountain. Yeah. So why really we are talking about this topic in our perspective of also tourists in Georgia, and why this forest exploitation is important for you as a tourist in Georgia as well. So I imagine that it may be a question that you're asking yourself. I'm just going there for holidays, so why this topic impacts everyone who has at least been one in Georgia. Even if you're not, marching across Jordan forest with a huge axe on your back and in your hand and take some home as a souvenir Georgian timber, which I assume you will not do. So the forest extensive exploitation, for example, in order to build new resorts and touristic infrastructure, is also something like part of an issue that we observe nowadays. For example, when you go to Georgia, maybe you have thought about it to go even closer by car to a glacier, or even deeper in the wild forest in Georgia to see how wild it is, and deeper by car, of course. So those are the aspects that we think as tourists, and we want to do that in Georgia, and it impacts directly or indirectly the forest as such. I just mentioned several cases that we have noticed. For example, and most often I think we have been noticing during the last season of the touristic season. For example, people asking us on their Facebook groups for tourists. So yes, it impacts you as well, and you impact the forest as well. Okay, so we have talked about the perspective from the tourists, you maybe, and some statistics. So let's now dive into how can you restore Georgian forest. So what can we do? So that deforestation or the other form of extensive usage of forest is connected with additional topic like the chances to restore those terrains to the states like they were earlier. So looking at the Soviet Georgia, because it gives us some perspectives, you may notice that the areas destroyed the most, so I mentioned also the Caucasus, according to the research also conducted in 2015, almost it is impossible to restore the areas, for example, of former collective farms. And why is that? Because it gives us perspective what is possible and what is not. The forest structure is so widely damaged there, and one has introduced also the plant species that completely changes the ecosystem. As a result, those are the areas with also progressing soil erosion, or the soil and the landslides completely from the during the heavy rains with almost nothing left. So the restoration process of such terrains takes really much more than a lifetime of one generation. It already gives us the perspective. So if we we do anything similar to that currently to Georgian forests in different areas, it may lead to the similar results. And if we have the soil erosion and soil sliding and then ground sliding simply from the mountains, and there are less trees simply being there, it results in more often happening landslides, avalanches, as well as climate change, of course, in the region. So what is the additional aspect, let's say? So this is the illegal deforestation in Georgia, where everything that I mentioned is legal, maybe something's illegal. So we are coming back to the statistics currently on data, official Georgian data of illegal deforestation. So 2019, there were 3,500 cases of such inactions, and it estimates that there were 21,000 cubic meters of timber cut down illegally. In 2020, this is 3,000 of such cases and 16,000 of timber cut down. In 2022, the Georgian government institutions registered over 12,000 of any illegal actions connected with the forest, including 4,000 of illegal deforestation cases. And we talk here only about the cases that were registered. So it means that someone got caught simply. For comparison, we took the statistics for a Polish person, so the winters in Poland, for if you are thinking now, okay, but they needed the heat to heat their home and something to make sure their house is warm. So we took into comparison, for example, Poland, because we are from Poland. So we took Polish statistics as well, and it shows that on average, Polish person uses 1 cubic meter of timber per year. And in Poland, I think we have a little bit harsh climate. I mean, we have, for example, longer winters in general. So you may see those cases, those are not just poor people gathering the wood for winter. Okay, so maybe now you are thinking, great, Asha, but what is really happening with the acquired timber? So both legally and not so much legally. So according to many sources analyzing Georgian deforestation and Georgian forest situation, in many cases, this timber is not staying in Georgia, but is being exported to external industries, very often connected with wood business and fuel materials. Unfortunately, there are not that many, I would say, reliable sources, because it is very hard hard sometimes to track it down to the source and to do the final, the whole research. That is why we just give you a glance, that's for sure. Many people say, and we do not want to share with you any gossips. But if you want to read more in general about, as I mentioned, about the deforestation and what happens with the timber research, you will find this in the materials, additional resources on our website. So the link for that to the article you will find in the description of today's episode. So we have covered, just let's sum up, we have covered how it happens, what it impacts, what is legal, what is illegal, etc. So one of the items that is left, this is the social aspect of Georgian disappearing forests. So the last part in today's episode I want to share with you of the Caucasus podcast. This is social and a little bit economic as well, perspective of the aspect of Georgian forests. So let's go a little bit back. So for many centuries in various regions, including as well Caucasus, forests helped the local inhabitants simply to survive. Thanks to sustainable non-industrial harvesting of plants and fruits, because you really do not forage mushrooms, it's not that popular in the Caucasus, or hunting for animals, wild animals living there, or gathering timber, as I mentioned, for making your house warm in winter, but doing that just for your purposes, many families survived turbulent times. Also within the last decades. Even now there are some places in Georgia where the forest still has its role, or I would say in some places it would have been if it's not degraded. One of the actions as well that negatively impacts this coexistence between local inhabitants and nature, this is leasing the Georgian vast forest areas to big companies. One of the example may be Racha region, which is really picturesque and marvelous place. You have to go there if you haven't been there. So in 2020, there was a decision on creating a national park, which was stopped by leasing 100,000 hectares of forest to one of the Russian oligarchs. Yes, exactly. And this is official lease. So some areas of this potential national park was also included in that lease. So as I mentioned, this is not only actions of illegal timber gathering, but also some legal actions that are there that are impacting the deforestation, that's the situation of forest. Because in general, we are, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are not only talking about cutting the trees for timber, but also the degradation of the forest as such, and it happens not only by cutting the trees. Yeah, so that is the part that you have to take in mind. And of course, there were more of such and similar cases. We had some as well in 2023 across the last decades. There were several at least of them, and I will not list now all of them because it will be long and this is not the purpose as such. I just want to show you how those things are happening. More about it, as I mentioned as well, you will find in the additional resources that we have. And in general, the changes in nature in Georgia due to human activity, this is the vast topic and much wider what we have covered today. And in this episode of the Caucasus podcast, what we try to show you, this is just one of those aspects. So the Georgian forest situation and its consequences for the whole region and for us as well. So the climate changes that are happening in the Caucasus due to deforestation, for example, impact directly or indirectly the whole world, not only us as tourists that we see something else that we have seen, for example, for last 10 years. So maybe the last question that you're asking yourself, and last question for today, what can we do for Georgian forests? So it would be great, wouldn't it, to finish this episode with some kind of call to action by don't buy this or do this, support something or do not support something else. However, This was not what we wanted really to achieve with this episode, but what we wanted to achieve with this episode of the Caucasus podcast, this is to show you the broader context. So that whatever you do, whatever decision you're making, at least you can do it consciously, or at least more consciously, because as I mentioned, not always we have all data, but what I hope you will have after this episode, this is a perspective, like what in general happens with the Georgian forests, in the Georgian forests, and across the Georgian forests. Yeah, so that was our goal. In the text version, so in the article on our website, on językniekaukazu.pl, on the website of our publishing house, you will find as well the links and the resources that we have used, and the additional materials, more, I would say, analysis about this topic. So if you're going to go deeper or to find out more, you can just go there and check it on your own after finishing listening to this particular episode. So if you like those episodes as well, because it was a little bit different than the other episodes that we have been doing in the Caucasus podcast so far, so let us know in the comments as well whether you like it and whether you want to more episodes like that, because we have many other topics as well in our hat. And you may also not only give us info in the comments, but you may just simply reply to one of the Caucasian mails, so our newsletter. So if you are not on our newsletter, the Caucasian mail as well, you may join us, and then you will get not only info about the new episodes, but also all our events and study books and courses about the Georgian language, because one of the items, like we today talk about Georgian forests and showing Georgian forest respect, and one of the ways to go deeper into Georgian culture, to understand more about Georgian traditions, this is also to know at least the basics of the language. So if you want to go do that and go that path, you will find a lot of materials on our website, also study books, self-study books, and online courses as well. So link for that you will find in the description as well of today's episode. And the last request for today, because before we wrap up, this is, if you like this episode, share that please with one of your friends that is interested either also with Caucasus or with nature ecology, because it will help us a lot to show also this bigger picture of Georgian forests, and maybe it will help your friends also to gather more information about what is going on in the Caucasus. Thank you very much for today. Let us know, guys, by subscribing to this channel and giving us thumbs up if you like this episode. Thank you very much, and see you in the next one, or maybe in our Georgian for Beginners series. See you. Bye bye.